All right, excellent. I'll go ahead and get started. Today's session is called Working with Dynamic Map Services and the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. This is a demo theater session. We have a lot of material to go over in a short period of time, so please hold your applause until the end. Okay. All right, okay, disruptors. Okay, so my name is Noah Sager. I'm a product engineer on the JavaScript team, and I'm here with
Yann Cabron. I'm a developer on the JavaScript API.
Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about the map image layer. So at 3.x, this is called the ArcGIS Dynamic MapServiceLayer. It was my favorite layer, but it's a little long, so we cut it down a bit to be MapImageLayer. So the map image layer can be created in two different ways. One from the service URL, or two from the ArcGIS portal item ID. I'll show you a quick example of what a beautiful map image layer looks like. So this is using 3D. All of these concepts are going to apply to 2D and 3D at the same time. So let's look at the code snippet to actually create it. So here we're using a map server from sample server 6. And all we have to do is require the map image layer module, give it a local argument name, and then we create a var layer equals a new map image layer, and then we supply the URL. And then you add the layer to the map. And let me backtrack for 1 second. All of these, this presentation, all the demos are going to be available on GitHub. This is the URL to the presentation and to the demos. If you want to take a quick picture or just write it down, feel free. And I'll give you a moment to get your cameras focused.
That's very nice of you.
Yeah, should have done it sooner. All right, and then we'll also be at the island after the presentation, so if you want to come up and get the URL or just talk about stuff, that's fine too. Okay. So the second way you can do it is referencing a portal item ID. It's also very straightforward. We require the same map image layer module. We create a new layer, and then we have a parameter called portal item, which will autocast. If you're familiar with that, it means you don't have to bring in the required module to use it. Then we just pass in that long, gnarly string, which is the item ID, and you'll get that in ArcGIS Online or you're in your portal for ArcGIS. Then you add the layer to the map just the same way you did as if it came from the URL. Okay, so now let's do some stuff with our map image layer. So this can be a simple sample showing the layer list widget and the legend widget working with the same map image layer. So here I have the legend widget in the lower left showing all that beautiful information. In the top right, I have the layer list widget. If you're unfamiliar with the layer list widget, you can easily turn layers on or off and do other cool things with your layer by accessing the sublayers in the map image layer. So I'll go ahead and show you what the code for that would look like. So to add the layer list, it's simply you bring in a var layer list equals new layer list, and you wouldn't need the required module for this. Then you assign the view, and then we use our view.ui to actually add the layer list widget to the top right. Legend widget is no different. We're going to do the exact same workflow, except this time we'll add the legend widget to the bottom left. So working with widgets, specifically these ones, are really easy when you're working with map image layers. Okay, that's all well and good, but let's talk about rendering and sublayers. So if you're familiar with map image layer, you know it's a collection of sublayers, which could also be the same as a feature layer working with the feature layer module. But we can actually render these layers individually. So here we're showing another very similar map, but I've actually gone in and stylized all the information in the code. So this time I'll open up Chrome DevTools, and we'll show you what the code looks like. Okay. And again, rendering, if you're unfamiliar, sorry if I'm going too fast, we just have a lot of exciting information. It's a way to define a set of rules to symbolize your information on the map so that you can tell a good story with it. So here I'm going to create a couple different renderers. One, I'll have a cities renderer, which I'll use for the cities layer. It's going to be a simple renderer of type simple marker symbol. I'm going to give it a size, a color, a style, and then a label so I can use it for things like a legend widget. So that's one renderer set up. I'll have a separate one for states renderer. This is also going to be simple. It's going to be a simple fill because I'm going to use this for a polygon layer. I give it a color, I give it an outline and a width, and then a nice handy label. Same thing for the highways label. All the principles apply to all the different renderers that we're using. We're just going to use them for different purposes. After that, I have my map image layer. It's coming from a portal item ID this time. And then I have the sublayers defined. If you define the sublayers, when you bring in a map image layer from portal, you're going to get the default rendering. If you don't define the sublayers, then you can actually have the styling you have in ArcGIS Online or in Portal. Because I'm defining the sublayers, I want to give each one a separate renderer, and you can only have one feature type per renderer. So I have one for points, one for lines, and one for polygons. So in the sublayers, I have sublayer 2 here, and then I assign it a renderer and opacity. Sublayer 1, give it a new renderer. Sublayer 0, give it a renderer itself. And then I just add those layers to the map, and we're done. Okay, so this is the code that I showed you before. This is just an example renderer that we use for the polygons, and then how we actually apply it to the individual sublayer. Definition expressions. So we can do some really cool stylings when we want to have a bit more control over actually how we're expressing the data on the map. So here we have the same data again, and we're still looking at states and highways and cities, but I have a definition expression with an interactive slider. So I can actually change the values here, and then I'll see the new information populated on the map. So by default, it was cities with a population over 100,000. Now it's showing with population over 1,000. I can slide it further to the right and show cities with a population greater than, say, 934,000. And the internet's a little slow here, but the experience is pretty good. So let's take a look at what that code looks like to create a definition expression. Okay. So when I set up the layer, I'm going to apply those same renderers that I had before. But I have another property for the cities layer, and that's definition expression. So by default, remember we said the population was going to be greater than 100,000. I have that right in the definition expression for that sublayer. And I add the layer to the map as before. And then I have some more interactive features here for the slider. When I change the definition expression, I can interactively set the value of the slider into the definition expression and then update the features on the map.
One of the things is like you will know about like population 2000. You can know that if you go to the URL to the service, and then here you will have oh, it's not this one, which let's see.
It's coming from a portal.
Okay. So let me just a second. Open in the new tab. All right, it's this guy. So that's the long URL that is sent to generate the image. Because it sends, yeah, every time it exports, it sends over like all the information about each renderer and so on. So here we have our city sublayer. So this is the ID that we had. And then you have all the default renderer, and you have all the IDs, right? The field names, right? So you can choose to filter basically with that population field, right?
Awesome, thank you, Jan. So it's good if you have to know your data before you can actually begin working with it. So that's a great example. Okay, and this is the code snippet again. Definition expression you can just set right in the sublayer property when you're creating your map image layer. Okay, so workspaces. So one of the really cool things that I learned recently was about working with workspaces in the map image layer. So we'll take a look at what the example looks like. So Jan showed the REST endpoint for the map image layer that we're using, which is USA Map Server. So we have cities, highways, states, and counties. That's what you've seen visualized so far. But I know when I published the data, I actually had a file geodatabase that was published along with it, but it's not accessible as a layer because I want to keep it as a geodatabase. But I can still have this bonus layer called railroads show up in my map because I'm working with the map image layer. So I go ahead and turn that one on, and maybe I'll turn the cities off and the highways off, reduce the noise a bit, and then it's going to make a new request and actually pull in that railroad layer from the same REST services that we looked at before. I'll show you how we do that. So we have a new layer. We give an ID of 4. By default, it's false. The visibility is false upon startup, and we're calling it railroads. I had a separate renderer folder called railroads renderer. And then inside the source, the type is going to be a data layer, and the data source will actually be a table. And this is the workspace ID of my table, and the actual geodatabase name with the class inside is the sample server 6 geodatabase.railroads. So you don't see this exposed at rest, But if you're publishing your data, you know what data is actually there, so you can find it and then actually still consume it in your web application. And of course, this is a nice toggling feature where you can turn layers on and off in your application. Cool. All right, so labeling. So one of the nice things that differentiates feature layers from map image layers, well, there's two nice things. One is, for map image layer, all the processing occurs on the server. So the server does the heavy lifting, and that allows you to actually display more images on the map than working with feature layer. The feature layer that we had talked about yesterday, it's all on the client side, so you're going to do it locally. Also, we have full labeling support for the map image layer, which is really nice. So we can take a look at that now. Not right now, but pretty soon. So I'll close these out. Okay, so here again, we're going to see the states layer in the United States, and it's going to show the labels for each state. And I'll get the developer tools going. So while that renders, I'll show you quickly what it looks like to actually have the labels. So for the states, for the labeling, I'm going to have a label info property inside the sublayer. And then I have a label expression. And so I know my data, so I know it has a name, and that's probably the most logical expression to use. The placement I want to be always horizontal, no matter how you pan or rotate the map. I want that to be a horizontal placement. And then I'll define the symbol. So it's going to be a text symbol because it's a label. I'll assign a color, a halo color, and then the font size, and of course the min and max scale that I want to display the label at. Oops. And it's having a little bit of trouble there. Let me see if I can zoom in once and show it. All right. So, okay, so now it's showing up. So that gave it away. So the counties also have a label on them. So you can see the state here in bold, and then I have the county layer also has labeling. Even though it's not displaying the different counties, it is displaying the labels for those counties. So I'm just pulling these again from sample server 6. All the data was already there. I could see it from REST, but now I have it displayed nicely on the map. All right. So pop-ups. Another cool thing you can do with these sublayers is display pop-ups on the map. So I'm going to go back and show again this beautiful map. So if I want to come up, say, to Montana, I can click on it. It's going to show me how many people live in Montana. I can also click on a city, say in Idaho, and it'll show me Boise City. This many people call the city of Boise, Idaho home. So again, this is just pulling information from the REST endpoint. We can go ahead and look at a code snippet of how that will look. Okay, so I have my renders as before, one for cities, states, and highways. Then when I come down to actually defining the layer, for ID 2, which I know is states render because that's how it's listed from REST, I have a pop-up template property. And the title I'm actually going to pull in. That's what those curly brackets are going to do. It's going to pull in the state name. And the content, I can interactively pull in information from REST and also put in plain text. So I'll say population, people live in, and then in this state. And then I can have the same here for cities, except it's a different field name. It's area name there. And that population of people will call that city home. Cool. Okay. And then here's a code snippet showing the same thing that we just talked about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jan, who's going to introduce dynamic layers from Enterprise.
Right. So Noah just showed like how he can assign, he can modify different sublayers with by specifying their ID. What is really nice also is that you can define a source on a sublayer, and we have different type of sources, but one of them is that we can actually specify what is the data from, what is the layer ID we want to pull the data from. So my sublayer has an ID 0, but then from the sublayer with ID 0, we pull the data from this service /1. So it's another layer. The use case for that is like if you want to have multiple sublayers that represent the same data, but with different renderers or different labeling on top of each other, you can duplicate the same sublayer and keep the same source for all of them, but then just increase the ID so that they are all different. So in this one, I've specified that I want to display the sublayer, the layer with the ID 1 on the service, but then I will call it ID 0, and then we have specified the title and renderer to have this nice visualization here. Okay. Right. So one of the other things you can specify in your source, Noah showed earlier, is the type. You can specify a source with a type data layer, and you can on that source you can specify a query. So let me show you directly the example. It's going to be nicer. So in this example, we see the cities. But then after, I can decide to just display the towns or display the census designated places. All right. And if we look at the code, what's happening when I choose an option inside the drop-down? So I have my map image layer, and then I define my data source, and I will specify my query to say, if we go, we have the different options. So this is my drop-down list, and each one of them have a value. So we want to display all the features that have the class city or the class town or the class CDP. And so when we select something in that drop-down, we just update the query with, we concatenate the beginning of our query with the selected value. So the beginning is like, okay, it's a full select, SQL select, okay, we select everything from the places table, and then where the category is a city, for example. So that's really nice. You can, it's kind of a definition expression, but you have more control. Okay. So what you can do also in your source is you can define you can join two tables. So you can define which table you want to join from the left and to the table on the right, and you can define two tables coming from your workspace. All of this is very interesting if, for example, you have a map service that has, let's say, the geometries and just the zip code attribute, for example, and then you have a table that you have tables where you have the zip codes and then 2000 attributes, so you can basically choose on the fly what you want to join with. So let's see. So in this guy. Yep. Let's go. So in this case, I want to join the layer with the ID 3 on my service, which will be the state, if I'm not mistaken. /3. Right, the states. So we want to join this table with, with the right, that table on the right, which is the ancestry. We specify what is the key on the left to join on the right, and then we specify the type of joint that we want to do. And then here, in this case, we have on top of that specified the pop-up template. So we can have a pop-up when I click, and we have the different fields that are generated from the joint here. So states.population 2007, and then I want to display also the ancestry, the Norwegian ancestry on the right, from the right table. And the network is really, really bad. But you get the principle. And one last type of data source that you have is to be able to display raster images. So I don't fully know the use case for it. I just know that it's one of the options. Basically, you can specify from a raster image from your workspace. So there is nothing really interesting here. We just can change the opacity, but we have this this TIFF file that is displayed on top of the imagery base map. So to do this, yeah, you just specify the data source type raster with where is located your TIFF file. All right. Okay, so one of the advanced features of the renderers are visual variables. We introduced that yesterday in the feature layer case. So on your renderer, so we have our type, our simple renderer with the base marker symbol, which has a gray outline. And then we can specify visual variables. So this is available in Enterprise 10.6. So basically, we will the visual variable here. We want to vary we want to set the size of our symbol based on the population field, and then we'll define stops. So at a population of 8,000 people, we want to have a marker size of 4 points. And then so on. We define multiple stops, and then all the values will be interpolated. Like if you have a population value of 400,000, is going to be between the size of my marker will be interpolated between 24 and 36. So let's have a look at this one. I'll close this. Okay, and in this case also we specify a color visual variable to also vary the color based on the population field. So we will have like bigger symbols that will have another shade of blue, right? So smaller symbols are like lighter, and then the bigger symbols are more blue. So all this information is always passed to the server every time we are panning around. So because we have visual variable support, we are adding in a 4.7 release, like in April, we will have smart mapping support. So because it might be complicated to figure out how to configure the renderer, so we integrate the smart mapping tools with the MapImageLayer. So the way to do that is we have all those different creators in the smart mapping package. So we want to create our renderer with the size of my symbols that will change. So we import the size renderer creator, and then we look for the sublayer that has the ID 0 to get our states sublayer, and then we call create feature layer on the sublayer on the state sublayer. So this function is new in 4.7. It just creates a feature layer already configured with the URL and all the parameters to query basically the sublayer. And then we want to map the population field, and our base map is dark gray, so we will pick up the right. Oh, well, in this case, it doesn't really matter, but in the case of a color creator, it would pick up the correct, the best appropriate color ramp for you, and then we want to define the maximum value so that we cap all the values that are greater than 1 million, I guess. Yeah. And then when we get back our renderer, we just assign it to the state sublayer, and then automatically we have a nice visualization for us. So this is very new, and it's really awesome for us. So just some details about the sublayer. So sublayers, if you don't define them, we just pull them from whatever the service has. And then the other option is that if you know about your service, you can define them directly in the code. But if you don't know them, you can always loop over them through all sublayers. So when your layer is loaded, you have this collection of all sublayers, and then to find, for example, a sublayer that you are interested in. Yeah, that's one example. The other one is like find. The other method that I just shown is find sublayer by ID. This one. So if you want to have a sublayer by ID and you don't know where it is in the hierarchy of sublayers, it's a convenient way to find it. And that concludes the presentation.
Yeah, so we covered a lot of material. We'll be ready to talk about it afterwards, but we have a couple minutes for questions now.
No, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, can you
injection attacks?
Yeah. How do we prevent SQL injection? I don't know. It would be the server. Yeah, we would have to ask the service, the server people to. Yeah. Yeah. We have no control about how the server would react to the definition expression, for example. Any other question? No? Well, thank you. Have a nice Thursday.